The small weathered church outside Silver Creek, Montana, had never seen a wedding quite like this one. It was 1883, and the entire community had turned out for the ceremony, though not all for supportive or kind reasons. Some came out of genuine happiness for the couple, delighted to see two good people finding love. Others came out of morbid curiosity, gossipy speculation, or even cruel amusement to see if the wedding would actually happen. At the back of the church, 26-year-old Sarah Mitchell stood nervously in her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit her smaller, more delicate frame. Her red hair was braided and pinned up elaborately under a simple lace veil, and her hands trembled visibly as she clutched a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked herself that morning. Beside her father stood stiffly, his weathered face displaying a mask of disapproval. He had warned consistently for the past 3 months since Sarah had announced her unexpected engagement. "It's not too late to call this whole thing off," her father said quietly, leaning close so only she could hear. "You don't have to go through with this marriage, Sarah. You could come back home with us and we'll simply tell everyone you changed your mind. No one would blame you." "I'm not changing my mind, Papa," Sarah said as firmly as she could manage, though her voice shook slightly with nerves and suppressed emotion. "I love him deeply, and he loves me just as much. That's all that truly matters in the end." Her father's pinched expression suggested he thought many other things mattered considerably more: social standing, practical considerations, what the neighbors would say. But he pressed his lips together and said nothing more. The organ music began, filling the small church with traditional wedding hymns, and Sarah took a deep, steadying breath. This was it. The moment she had been both anticipating and dreading. She took her father's stiff arm, and they began the long walk down the center aisle. Sarah had been born with a club foot, a congenital condition that left her right foot turned severely inward and made walking both difficult and chronically painful. She had learned over her 26 years to manage reasonably well with a specially built-up shoe and a sturdy wooden cane, but she still walked with a pronounced, obvious limp that had been the subject of cruel comments, pitying stares, and social exclusion her entire life. Today, determined to walk down the aisle like any other bride without obvious assistance, she had left the cane behind at home. But walking without the supportive cane was proving much harder than she had anticipated, especially on the uneven, warped wooden floor of the old frontier church. Every single step sent sharp pain shooting up her leg like lightning, and she had to concentrate intensely on maintaining her balance and not stumbling visibly. The walk that would take another bride perhaps 30 seconds seemed to stretch on endlessly, each step an eternity of effort and discomfort. And then she heard the whispers starting. They began quietly at first but grew progressively louder as she made her slow, painfully limping progress down the aisle, each word cutting into her like a knife. "Oh, look at how she walks. Poor pathetic thing. Can she even run a household properly moving like that? He must be absolutely desperate to marry someone like that. She'll never be able to keep up with the demands of ranch life. What was he thinking, choosing her?" The whispers grew into barely concealed snickers from some of the younger people in attendance, particularly a group of young men who had probably been drinking before the ceremony. Sarah's face burned with humiliation and shame, her cheeks flaming red, but she kept her eyes resolutely fixed on the altar ahead, where her intended stood waiting and watching. "Just keep going," she told herself. "Don't cry. Don't stumble. Almost there." Halfway down the aisle, Sarah's bad foot caught painfully on a particularly rough raised plank in the floor, and she stumbled badly, nearly falling. Her father caught her arm roughly to prevent her from going down completely, but the near fall caused outright laughter from the group of young men near the back of the church. Sarah's eyes filled with hot, humiliated tears that she desperately tried to blink away, but she forced herself to keep moving forward. Just a little further. She could do this. She had to do this. At the front of the church, waiting patiently at the simple wooden altar, stood Caleb Turner. He was 31 years old, a successful rancher who had built his impressive spread from absolutely nothing over the past hard-working decade. He was tall and powerfully built from years of physical labor, undeniably handsome with sun-bronzed skin and kind eyes, and could easily have had his pick of any unmarried woman in the entire territory. But he had chosen Sarah deliberately and without hesitation. They had met 6 months earlier when Sarah had been hired to teach at the small one-room school located near his ranch property. Caleb had twin daughters from his first marriage, 8-year-old girls named Emma and Lucy, and he made a point of attending every school event and meeting to stay involved in their education. He and Sarah had started with friendly conversations, which led to walks together after school, which blossomed into formal courting. Caleb had fallen in love with Sarah's sharp intelligence, her boundless kindness to all the children, her quiet strength of character and dignity. The fact that she walked with a pronounced limp was simply an incidental fact about her, no more significant or defining to him than the color of her eyes or the way she laughed. But as Caleb stood at the altar watching Sarah make her obviously painful way down the aisle, listening to the cruel whispers and mocking laughter that people weren't even bothering to hide, he felt white-hot rage building in his chest. How dare they? How dare these people mock and belittle the woman he loved on what should be the happiest, most sacred day of her life? When Sarah stumbled badly and the laughter grew even louder and more pointed, Caleb made a split-second decision. Without hesitation, he strode purposefully down the aisle away from the altar, his boots echoing loudly on the wooden floor, the sound cutting through and silencing the whispers momentarily. "Caleb, what are you doing?" the preacher called after him in confusion. "The ceremony hasn't started yet." Caleb ignored the preacher, ignored everyone in the church except Sarah. He reached her where she stood frozen with her disapproving father, her face burning red with humiliation, tears streaming freely down her pale cheeks, her whole body trembling. "I've got you now," Caleb said gently, his voice full of love and reassurance. Then, before Sarah could protest or object, he swept her up carefully into his strong arms, wedding dress, veil, bouquet, and all, cradling her against his chest as if she weighed nothing at all. "Caleb." "No, please put me down," Sarah whispered urgently, mortified. "People are staring at us. This is making it worse." "Let them stare all they want," Caleb said loudly enough for absolutely everyone in the church to hear him clearly. "My bride deserves to make her entrance with dignity and without pain or mockery. If any of you think there's something wrong or shameful about me carrying my wife, you can get up and leave this church right now. You're not welcome here." He turned deliberately to face the full congregation, Sarah still held securely in his arms. "In fact, let me be absolutely crystal clear about something. Anyone here who thinks less of Sarah because of how she walks, anyone who whispered cruel words or laughed at her suffering just now, you are not welcome at this wedding. You can leave immediately. Get out." The church fell completely, utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Several people looked genuinely ashamed, staring down at their hands or shoes. A few of the young men who had been laughing so cruelly actually stood up and shuffled out of the church quickly, unable or unwilling to meet Caleb's fierce, challenging gaze. Caleb turned back toward the altar and carried Sarah the rest of the way down the aisle with steady, confident steps. When they reached the front of the church, he gently set her down on her feet, making absolutely sure she was steady and balanced before releasing his supportive hold. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly, searching her tear-stained face with concern. Sarah nodded, completely unable to speak past the enormous lump in her throat and the overwhelming emotion flooding through her. No one had ever defended her like that before. No one had ever made her feel so valued, so protected, so genuinely loved and treasured. The preacher, visibly moved by what he had just witnessed, cleared his throat and began the ceremony with a somewhat shaky voice. When it came time for the traditional vows, Caleb looked deep into Sarah's red-rimmed eyes and spoke clearly and firmly so everyone could hear. "Sarah, I vow before God and all these witnesses to love you exactly as you are, without reservation or condition. I vow to carry you whenever you need it, to support you always in every way, and to spend the rest of my life making absolutely sure you know how precious and valuable you are. I vow to be the kind of husband who sees your incredible strength, not your physical struggles. I vow to build a life with you where you never, ever have to walk alone or face cruelty without someone standing beside you. Sarah's tears were flowing freely now, streaming down her face, but they were tears of pure joy and overwhelming love. When it was her turn to speak her vows, her voice was thick with emotion but strong. "Caleb, I vow to be the wife you deserve and the mother your daughters need. I vow to love Emma and Lucy as if they were my own flesh and blood. I vow to work beside you every single day, to support you in all your endeavors, and to never let the cruel opinions of small-minded others shake my faith in us and what we're building. I vow to be strong enough to accept your help when I need it and brave enough to love you with my whole heart," holding nothing back. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed Sarah tenderly, gently, reverently. Then he scooped her up into his arms again and carried her back down the aisle to thunderous, genuine applause from the people who had remained in the church, the people who truly mattered, the people who understood what real love looked like. Outside the church, as the spectacular sunset painted the endless Montana sky in brilliant shades of gold, orange, pink, and purple, Caleb carefully set Sarah down on her feet but kept his arm firmly, protectively around her waist for support. "Thank you," Sarah said, her voice still thick with emotion. "Thank you for what you did in there, for defending me so publicly and fiercely." "Sarah, you never, ever have to thank me for loving you," Caleb said earnestly. "And you never have to face cruelty or prejudice alone again. We're true partners now in every sense. Your battles are my battles. Your pain is my pain. Your joy is my joy." "I was so terribly afraid," Sarah admitted quietly. "Afraid that you'd be embarrassed by me, that you'd regret choosing me when you could have had anyone. Afraid that you'd see me struggle and realize you'd made a terrible mistake. The only thing I regret is that anyone ever made you feel less than the absolutely remarkable, extraordinary woman you are," Caleb said with fierce conviction. "Sarah, you are genuinely the strongest person I have ever known. You've faced prejudice, pain, exclusion, and cruelty your entire life, and somehow you've remained kind, compassionate, and good. That's real strength. That's true character. That's what matters." The weeks and months that followed their controversial wedding proved Caleb's passionate words to be completely true. Sarah moved into the comfortable ranch house and immediately became a devoted, loving mother to Caleb's twin daughters, who adored her from the very first day. She continued teaching at the school, refusing to let her physical limitations define or restrict what she could accomplish in life. She proved to be an excellent ranch wife, managing the complex household efficiently, keeping meticulous accounts, and supporting Caleb's business decisions with her sharp, analytical mind and good judgment. And Caleb kept every single one of his vows faithfully. On days when Sarah's foot caused her particular pain from the weather or overuse, he carried her without the slightest hesitation or complaint. He built her a special chair with proper ergonomic support for the kitchen so she could work comfortably for hours. He installed sturdy handrails throughout the entire house. But far more important than all the physical accommodations, he provided something Sarah had never experienced before in her entire life: complete, unconditional acceptance. He never made her feel burdensome or defective. He simply loved her exactly as she was. 5 years after their memorable wedding, at a large community gathering celebrating the founding of the town, one of the women who had whispered cruel things at the wedding ceremony approached Sarah hesitantly. "Mrs. Turner, I wonder if I might speak with you privately for just a moment." Sarah nodded and stepped aside with her. "I want to sincerely apologize to you," the woman said, her eyes downcast with obvious shame. "On your wedding day 5 years ago, I said some very unkind things. I whispered and gossiped. I judged you harshly and unfairly. I was completely wrong to do that. Watching you these past 5 years, how you've loved those girls so devotedly, how you've built such a beautiful life in partnership with Caleb, how you've contributed so much to our community. I'm deeply ashamed of my past behavior." Sarah looked at the woman thoughtfully for a moment. "Thank you for having the courage to apologize. It takes real strength to admit you were wrong. I forgive you completely and hold no grudge." That evening, as Sarah and Caleb sat together on their wide porch watching another spectacular sunset paint the sky, Sarah asked quietly, "Do you ever regret carrying me down the aisle that day? I know some people still talk about it, still think it was strange or inappropriate. I regret absolutely nothing about that day, except that you had to hear those cruel, heartless words in the first place, Caleb said firmly. Sarah, carrying you down that aisle was honestly the easiest decision I've ever made in my entire life. You needed help, I could provide it, end of story. There was no decision to make. You made a very public statement, Sarah said. You showed everyone watching that you weren't ashamed of me or my disability. I showed everyone that you're infinitely precious to me, Caleb corrected gently. That's all that mattered then, and that's all that matters now. Sarah, you have never been a burden or an embarrassment. You've been an absolute blessing, to me, to the girls, to everyone whose life you've touched with your kindness and wisdom. Years later, when their own children, 3 more over the years, asked curiously about their parents' wedding day, the twins Emma and Lucy, now grown women with families of their own, would tell the story with obvious pride. Your mother walked halfway down the aisle on her wedding day, Emma would begin. And some people were unspeakably cruel. They whispered mean things. They actually laughed at her for limping. But your father didn't hesitate for even 1 second, Lucy would add with a smile. He walked right down that aisle in the middle of the ceremony, picked her up like she weighed nothing, and carried her the rest of the way to the altar. And then he told everyone who had been cruel that they weren't welcome at the wedding, Emma would continue. He defended her publicly in front of the entire community. It was the bravest thing I've ever seen. Sarah would smile, still holding Caleb's hand after all those years. Your father taught me that accepting help isn't weakness. That letting someone carry you sometimes, literally or figuratively, is just part of loving and being loved. That's one of life's most important lessons, Caleb would add, squeezing her hand. And your mother taught me that true strength has absolutely nothing to do with physical perfection or conforming to society's narrow standards. Real strength is about character, courage, compassion, and kindness. She possessed all of those qualities in remarkable abundance, and she still does. Because sometimes the most powerful defining moment in a wedding isn't the kiss or even the spoken vows. Sometimes it's when one person says clearly through their actions for everyone to witness, I see you struggling, and I'm here. You don't have to face this alone or bear this burden by yourself. Let me help. Let me love you properly. Let me show this whole world that you're worth defending, worth carrying, worth absolutely everything. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales of love that sees beyond limitations and courageously defends what matters most. Comment below about what this story meant to you. Thank you for listening and for believing in the power of standing up for the people we love, no matter what others may think or say.